How we doing today, guys? It's good to see everyone. Those who are, I missed, Happy New Year to you guys. 2021, ready for bigger and better things this year. It's great to be a part of this community with you guys. I enjoy it a lot. I look forward to the feedback and the comments and the insight. Sometimes just good advice. And I want to thank you all for taking the time to comment and respond. Maybe someone can tell me why, but once in a while I'll see a comment come up in my alert, my little bell that says, oh, you got comments. And I'll look to click on it and it won't be there. So I'll go back and go backwards and I'll see the first few lines of it in my box, but I can't open it and it's not on the video. And it happens about once a week or so, or there's a comment that like, that's interesting. Who is this? I want to respond to that. And I often can't because it just disappears. And it doesn't seem to ever come back. And I don't know what that's about. If the commenter deleted it, maybe. But it seems to happen too frequently for someone to write a long response and then delete it. And most of them seem like they're supportive, enjoyed this comments, not this channel sucks kind of comments where someone says, oh, I'm not going to post that and deletes it. Frankly, I get very few trollers. And most of the people who do have negative comments, it's mostly just jazz opinion related, and some political stuff, which we haven't been delving too much into as of late. The orange guy's still sticking around making a fool of himself. I just saw some headline in the Toronto paper about Ivanka running in 2024, and boy, I don't think democracy can handle that. But that being said, democracy really hasn't handled any of this last 50 years very well. America's made mincemeat of the democratic process. It's all become kind of they've subverted it. They just found ways around it. And the political deadlock that we have, it's also by design to keep us in the stalemate while the underlying machine still operates unhindered. And that's what we can't change, is what's already happening in place. Even that orange guy had a tough time changing a lot of the institutions that were happening and in place and function with or without a president. Like those things, a lot of those things are just forward-moving things. And it's kind of shocking how little power the president has in some aspects. Of course, when you have a guy that kind of breaks the rules and makes royal decrees and doesn't care about how the system's supposed to work, it really throws even a greater wrench into it. But again, we're not going to talk politics today. But so if anyone knows why those comments disappear, is it something I need to do to get them back? And if you've ever made a comment that I haven't liked or responded to, sometimes that's why. I can't get at it. So anyone knows anything about that? I'm not a very knowledgeable YouTuber on some levels. I don't really know a lot of the mechanics of commercials. A lot of times, because I put music in, my episodes get either partially demonetized or completely demonetized, and then they throw all the commercials on there they seem to want. Again, I haven't spent a whole lot of time researching that aspect of it, and even the ones that I do monetize, my best paying episode ever, that goes $8. I think in 2020, I think I made about $360 off YouTube itself. And that was off of probably 6-7 months of being monetized. So it's still such a trickle of money that I keep playing the music, hoping they don't get demonetized, but they still sometimes do. My last 2 episodes were completely demonetized. And like I said, I'm losing out $8, $10, $12 over the course of the long haul, depending how long some episodes stay being viewed. And I'm still kind of figuring all that stuff out. But I'm not too concerned about it. First of all, I want to talk about a guy by the name of Bud Johnson. Those who watched my series on the great saxophone players, Bud Johnson's a Texas tenorman in the school of Illinois Jacquet. And he's just a great blower with a ton of feel and emotion. Cannonball Adderley knew how great he was and brings him into Riverside for one of his Cannonball Adderley Presents records. And he has quite the lineup here with him. There's 4 trumpet players. And I'll be honest, I can kind of tell who's who some, but it's hard to kind of define who's who all the time on this. Harry Sweets Edison is fantastic, and he's often soft and muted. Ray Nance is on this, of course, of Ellington fame. Clark Terry, who's also a guy with a lot of Ellington experience and a lot of great solo groups as well. And then Nat Adderley, who's Cannonball's younger brother, rounds out the trumpet section. And there's a nice little rhythm section on this too, with Joe Benjamin on the bass, Jimmy Jones or Tommy Flanagan on the piano, and a guy by the name of Herb Lovell on the drums, recorded in 1960 in New York. And it's just a great record that I think people pass over. The cover's not super eye-catching, but it's great. It's fantastic. And the trumpet players, there's a competition, especially when you get 4 guys in there with the same horn. They all want to kind of show you how they say the language, what their accents are. And they're all fairly different sounding, but there's still times where I'm like, okay, who was that? And on this particular track, there's a couple fiery licks that my gut tells me is probably Nat Adderley. I'm pretty sure it's not Sweets Edison. And I'm pretty sure it's not Ray Nat. It could be Clark Terry, but I think it's Nat Adderley, because Nat spits fire. Nat's such an aggressive player. He reminds me of Lee Morgan in some level. And he might even be a brighter player than Lee Morgan in terms of his tonality. It's just really bright, piercing, aggressive. Nat always kind of sheds a lot. And it's funny because his brother Cannonball is a fairly laid-back cat. But I wanted to show this record. I played it yesterday. I posted it on Facebook. And I can tell a lot of people didn't know it. And it's a great Riverside session from 1960. From the golden era of Riverside, number 343. You know? So it's something if you see in a record store, you should grab it. It's got a lot of swinging blues on it. And it's just a lot of fun. You know? And Bud Johnson's a great player. You know, he just plays the blues. He's in that firm tradition. If you like Dexter Gordon, if you like Ben Webster, Bud Johnson, if you like Illinois Jacquet, you know, he's in that same vein. Fantastic stuff. Another record I want to show real quick is by a very fiery player who, from my recollection, had a drug issue. But Red Rodney is a heck of a trumpet player. And this is a great session on the Signal label. And it's got Ira Sullivan, Tommy Flanagan, Oscar Pettiford, and Philly Joe Jones. So it's a serious rhythm section on that. Ira's a great sax player out of the Chicago school. Red has a really strong pedigree. If you go back to some of the early Parker sessions in the mid to late 40s, Red Rodney's on a lot of those sessions. And Parker chose Rodney to go on tour with a few times. Rodney was just an important guy in the bebop era and can play with a great deal of fluidity and ferocious fire. Savoy bought the Signal label in probably 1958, 59, and there's only half dozen titles that I know of that Signal put out. But most of that stuff gets reissued on Savoy, a lot of it with alternate covers, so you gotta be careful with that. But there's a Cecil Payne record that was on here. There's the Nika's Tempo record that was on Signal. There was this fantastic session. There's another one that's a Duke Jordan record. That's a fairly popular title. That was initially a Signal that Savoy reissued once they bought out Signal. So that even in the early days, the cannibalization of jazz labels was in full force. Blue Note kind of absorbed Transition out of Boston. A lot of these labels didn't have a long shelf life. And sometimes when the label bought out another label, they would reissue the music. Other times they just wanted access to certain artists or a title or two. It's a very convoluted scene that shifts around a great deal. This Rodney record is fun. I really, really love the up-tempo, brassy tone of what Red Rodney's about. He doesn't really play around, you know. It's he's a pretty intense cat. And like I said, from what I recall, the guy did have a drug problem. But in the 1950s in the ghettos, most people in America were exposed to heroin pretty frequently. So last night, I I was watching some BBC jazz documentaries upstairs, and sometimes at night, I'm usually with my wife, watching stuff with her at night, and often one time she goes to bed, I just put something kind of mindless on that I can just kind of zone off to. Been watching a lot of British Top Gear, looking at the difference between life in Europe versus life in America. And Jeremy Clarkson especially, boy, has some poignant words about America. They just did this tour of the South in Cadillacs and pickup trucks. This is probably 10, 15 years ago. And their portrayal of America ain't far off the mark. It certainly doesn't glamorize it, or it doesn't even show you both sides of the story. They just show you kind of the down and out and beaten, ugly side of America. And I think Clarkson kind of enjoys that. I think a lot of conservative British people enjoy kind of making fun of the colonies, as he says. But anyway, I was watching these jazz documentaries on BBC last night and kind of really enjoying it. One thing I was happy with was how little of it was new to me or ground I wasn't pretty well versed in. I was fairly like, yeah, this is, and I was able to even pick out backing members and groups that they weren't talking about who that was. Like, oh, that's so and so. Oh, that's so and so. Oh, that's Al Gray right there. I can tell playing the mute on the trombone, Count Basie. And it was revealing to me just how even into the 70s and 80s, the late night talk shows, the morning daily updates, jazz interviews, and the respect and honor paid to the jazz greats in England and Europe is so different. You know, Ella Fitzgerald and Count Basie, like, oh, Oscar Peterson were on this talk show, and they're just a reverence. They're viewed as nobility. You know, such a degree of respect and sanctified holiness. Like they're revered as a deity almost, because there's a recognition of their sacrifice, and there's a revelation when they come to Europe of just how different it is. And I think it makes Europeans feel somewhat pious, but justifiably so. And it makes the blacks in Europe feel loved and honored like they should have been treated. But it's just weird to see how different, how much footage there was of these great jazz players in Europe being interviewed and spoken to by a lot of the media in these places with a great deal of reverence. And it was very interesting to see. And you don't see Ella Fitzgerald on David Letterman, at least not from what I remember, you know. And I don't watch jazz documentaries as much as I should. I spend a lot of time thinking jazz, talking jazz, listening to jazz. And so by the time I turn my TV on at night, sometimes I just want to clear my palate and do something different. I don't really turn my TV on much after dinner. I try not to have it on during the day. And so once I get to doing a jazz documentary once in a while, it's always nice to see where I'm at with it and how much of it I was a lockstep with. And like, yeah, and it was interesting. I really enjoyed it. I watched the second one. It was probably a couple hours long, about the swing era. And again, everything from the Benny Goodmans to Armstrong to Ellington, and of course Basie, and the respect that was had for Fletcher Henderson and how the Great Migration, the whole history was, it's always interesting to kind of rewatch, and kind of it validates a lot of what I had to say watching it. You know, just the kind of tragedy that this music comes out of. I'm not off base with what I say. It's a incredible tumultuous time that it takes the greatest degree of overcoming to find joy and rejoice in spite of these sorrows, and that's the magic of the music. And it's not to say later music doesn't have its own fuel. It does. All music has an element of it's coming from somebody's way of thinking, somebody's place in the world. But this era, especially for me, like I said last episode, it can draw me to tears at times. And they ended up talking about Billie Holiday, and they played a song that I've long been haunted by. And I think that's the right word for Strange Fruit. It's a haunting piece of art. And the lyric, I believe, was written for her to sing, if I recall. I know it was written as a poem originally. I think they had her in mind, if I recall. I'm not sure. But anyway, she was chosen to do it. And the song was banned. It was banned almost everywhere in America. It was banned by the BBC in England. It's just amazing how it's I almost get emotional sometimes thinking about this stuff. She was on tour with Artie Shaw, and they were in a hotel, and they were using the elevator, and guests were complaining about there being an N-word in the elevator, and they would come up to the hotel security and managers and say, "Is this what kind of establishment you run? You allow these half-breed N-words in your establishment?" And they had to go to Artie Shaw and meekly say, "Could you please ask her to ride in the freight elevator?" And I just don't think I can grasp that indignation, how offensive and how hurtful it must be to be in there with your peers, playing with Artie Shaw, who's recognizing you as this wonderful talent. And she's still a fairly young cat at this age. You know, she's a weathered 35 or whatever she is, but this is pretty early in her career. And she is just kind of destroyed by it on some level. She quits the Artie Shaw band. She ends up no longer touring. She kind of refuses to go down to the South ever again. And she ends up staying pretty much in New York and in the Northeast. I think she makes it out to LA for a few sessions for Verve later on. But she seems very much disenfranchised. And unlike Armstrong and Duke and Count, who kind of know they need to be out there as an ambassador, she had enough sorrow in her life already. She came from just the most poverty and the saddest of upbringings. And so when she sings the blues, it's such an easy thing. And you give her a melancholic piece like this. For those of you who aren't familiar with Strange Fruit, it's a reference to lynching and black bodies hanging in the breeze from the trees in the South. And it can make your hair stand on end. I was hoping they'd add the lyrics in here to read to you. But if you don't know Strange Fruit, you need to go and listen to it. You know, pause this video, go and listen to it, and then come back to this video and think about what that song is saying. The ghastly faces, the terror, the public spectacle that a lynching was. As white people, when injustice happens to us, we often rely on the support of society and the hope that the justice system will mete out some form of punishment, some form of redemption. You know what I mean? Even in a sense, I want to see you go to jail for almost out of revenge. But we get justice and we get sympathy, and people will reach out to us and love us and say, "Oh, it's awful what you went through. Sorry it happened to your son. Sorry." It's in the black community during a lynching, it was almost a civic holiday mentality. Woohoo! We got to get together in the town square and lynch us some N-words. And in that setting, there's no hope for justice. Where do you turn? Who do you look to and say, "We need some revenge, some justice, some judicial inquiry"? And there just wasn't that. There just was no outlet, no place to turn. And I can't conceive of the terror and the fear, especially if you're a black mother and your son is out there just doing what sons do. And a white mom says, "Jimmy, don't forget your mittens." A black mom says, "Tell the cop yes sir, no sir." I know this firsthand. I've seen it on Facebook. I've seen the posts black mothers post and how they fear for their children every day, still today. And thankfully, lynchings have become less of the public spectacle, but you can still be black and get shot down the streets in America pretty regularly, and justice, the cops often don't get indicted or charged. It's not super different. It's different than this public spectacle of a crowd gathering cheering the death of your child, who often had just been accused and not even tried. It's just, so watching Billie enunciate these tearful, sorrow-filled, anguished lyrics, it just moves me, man. It makes me feel things that only great art can make you feel. And I just figured I'd want to share a little bit about that, because Strange Fruit was one of the first songs that years ago for me informed me about what jazz was about. That lyric, that social consciousness, that awareness of my vulnerability in the place I have zero capacity to change it. I just can't imagine that daily life. And it really kind of rings my... It just rings my soul. And Billie was such a strong woman for having made it as far as she did in life, in spite of what she went through. And she had a drug problem. She loved to drink. She loved to rough and tumble it with the boys. I've read she was a gambler. She was a risk taker. She was the one often going out and making the scores so people could all get high. She wasn't someone you mess with. But being in this hotel with Artie Shaw and this white band, and being asked to ride in the freight elevator, I'm going to guess that people's dogs rode in the regular public elevator. I'm guessing you could have taken a couple monkeys up the regular elevator and no one would have said nothing. Oh, the monkeys are just part of the show. Oh, okay. But saying, oh, that Negro colored woman's just part of the show, that wasn't enough. People were so offended by her being there. What the... It's... Wow. Wow. Go ride in the elevator, you half human. Go ride with some freight. Don't get near my food unless you rub off someone that black on. Such hatred. Such fear. And a lot of white America did live in fear of black retribution. That was something that was kind of omnipresent, I think, was that they were all worried and constantly living in concern that the black uprising was going to come and retribution was going to be meted out. But a messed up jazz singer is playing with a white band. What kind of damage could she do? Why you got to put your kids under your arms and shield them from having to set their eyes upon this black lady who is a saint in my eyes? And believe me, she's a sinner in a lot of aspects. She was a rough and tumble gal, but her gospel, her blues, is one of the greatest renditions of the blues that anybody's ever performed. And her range was very limited. She's a single octave gal, so she wasn't like Ella, where she was just flying through chords and harmonies and intricate rhythms. That's not Billie Holiday. Billie Holiday is kind of getting into the soul of a lyric and then casually singing kind of behind the groove and then inflecting it with her own experience. Somehow that can make even a happy song seem ironically sad. A joyous celebration seem melancholic but it's not for me. You know what I'm saying? She seems to be able to find rain in a sunny day. And it's not really woe is me feeling sorry for myself. It's just more, this is as much as my heart can take. I'm at the edge of my barometer for my emotional well-being so consistently. So often I'm just so wrung dry of my resistance to this tyranny, my living among the devils and demons of hate and fear. And like I said, it's enough to move you to tears sometimes. And it's out of that stew that jazz percolates and bubbles and boils over. And it's so incredible to me that out of all of this, jazz's message to the world was love, forgiveness, healing. And a lot of it was helping them heal themselves and stay together. But it was also such a celebration in spite of itself that it sent this message of love out into the world as an ambassador for the black people of America. And love does conquer hate. Love does conquer fear. We found a cat New Year's Day. Our dog found her. She was out there mewing, hungry, shaking, cold, and she was scared. And we brought her in. We've been feeding her for 4 days straight, bathing her, petting her, and now she's purring and playing and rolling around. And her fear has been overcome by love. And now Henry's the 9th member of our family. Me and my wife, 2 kids, 4 cats, and a dog. And love is a powerful thing. And cats are the most incredible example of what love is. Cats aren't a carrier of the empathy gene. Cats play with their prey in a merciless kind of setting until they decide to end it for them. Like it's not that far from torture what cats do with mice. And they're just predatory, refined, finite killers is what a cat is. And they're indifferent to humans. However, if you love a cat will eventually decide to love you back. If you can teach a cat what love is, and what does that say about all the people in the world who aren't getting love? All the people in this world who are left and abandoned. It's how the fractures and what's broken inside of us starts to dominate who we are. The cracks become bigger. The hurt becomes stronger, more powerful when there's no one gluing us back together with love. Love is the sinew, the stitching, the glue that keeps our tattered fabric together. And in our own power, in our own steam, we would eventually lose control of our pieces. And that's what happens to people who don't get the love. My wife works with the homeless. My wife has worked with the mentally ill a lot of times. And the mentally ill especially, a lot of their first and most powerful symptoms are no one loves them. And they're often to blame for that. They've often driven family out of their lives. They've often been unmanageable to the people who tried to help them. But they get to a place where no one is there for them anymore. And the mental illness takes over. That fractures become deeper and the sadness becomes omnipresent. And we've seen it in a lot of my wife's clients. And so you see how without love, life is tough, it's bleak, it's empty. And with love, it's filled with meaning and joy and purpose. Love is the most important thing in this life. And it's why we need to keep our commitments and fulfill our promises, because that's what love is about. And love is not just an emotion I feel right now. Love is a choice I have made to love you in spite of when I'm mad at you, or when I feel like You failed me. I still love you in spite of me being upset right now. Love is a powerful thing. And jazz music is an ambassador of love. Jazz is going out there and saying, you know what? We love you. Let's have a good time. Let's dance anyway. That's the most incredible thing that I've come across in this life. Love. And it's why I love jazz, because jazz reminds me of the power of love. And the black community in America will be remembered as nobility. They will be enshrined in the halls of time as one of the greatest people to ever live. And America will be remembered for what these black men and women accomplished in spite of such great odds and oppression. So Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit, if you don't know it, listen to it, think about what those words are saying, and then comment and let me know what it made you feel. You know what I mean? Regardless of your politics, regardless of your social setting, listen to that her sing that and tell me what it makes you think and feel. Bud Johnson, a fantastic sax player. His records on Argo are also fantastic. He surrounds himself a lot of times with Bassyites, so he knows how to swing his butt off. He knows how to play the blues, and is definitely worth checking out because you can get his records for next to nothing. You can find those Bud Johnson Riverside and Argo records for $5 to $40, depending on condition and depending on the seller. A lot of sellers who aren't jazz guys will mark up the Miles Davises and the names they know, but the names they don't know, they're like, $10, $8, you know. And Bud Johnson's a name that just doesn't ring. And so a lot of sellers will have his stuff for really affordable prices. Of course, the people who know that that's an old Riverside. You know, someone asked for $40. But you won't find Bud Johnson's records for more than that very often. And then the Red Rodney on Signal, which, of course, Savoy does reissue. It's a great cover. You know, it's got that Reed Miles kind of Blue Note layout to it. A great band. And it swings hard, plays the blues wonderfully. And Rodney definitely was one of those white cats that was right at home with the brothers. And it's another thing that one of the documentaries talked about last night was a guy like Benny Goodman, the great New York jazz. What's her name? I saw her in a video last night. She's also in the Ken Burns doc. She talks about if Benny Goodman could have had any wish, it would have been to be colored. He felt at home with those guys, and it brought him great sadness when he was working with Teddy Wilson and Lionel Hampton, and he had to go on tour. And all of his wisdom, all of his experience, all of his advisors and counsel said, you can't bring those black guys with you. And he fought with himself about it and ended up leaving them home. And this is in the 30s. But still, Goodman does a lot to bring black America to white America. Whiteman's were so refined, and Whiteman's not the crossover guy. It's Goodman. It's Goodman that really, with those Fletcher Henderson charts, and Fletcher was huge in the 20s. Louis goes to New York to play with Fletcher Henderson. Coleman Hawkins played with Fletcher Henderson. Fletcher was such an important element of the swing in its earliest moments. He was really one of those guys that perpetuated what the music was going to be. And eventually got into kind of money problems, and he sold some of his charts, and Benny Goodman was there to swoop them up. And once the Benny Goodman group was playing those black charts, the sky was the limit. And one of the British columnists said he's kind of the first Elvis in a way. You know, the guy that really brought black music to white America successfully. And I think it was Stanley Crouch who said, when I listened to Benny Goodman for the first few times, it sounded to me like a black guy playing with a bunch of white cats. And I can recognize exactly what he's talking about as well. And I've often heard that on white jazz records where the one cat really has the blues and knows how to be empathetic with that black swing and sound. A lot of the other white cats are just kind of rigid and going through the motions, you know, getting a paycheck. And I'm sure a lot of them loved it, but loving something and feeling something isn't the same. So Red Rodney's a badass dude. no question about it. And again, Billie Holiday, Strange Fruit. Give me your thoughts on it. I'm sure a lot of you are going to be well versed and well aware of what that's about. But for those of you who are new to jazz, or those of you who just haven't gone that far back, tell me a song more poignant, more painful, more visual. It really paints a picture. And Billie just delivers it with such nuance and such panache. And even the BBC banned it, which I thought was interesting. You know, I'm just not surprised that American radio and all that banned it. There was a time where one of the great radio shows in the 20s, out of Chicago, had this Saturday night dance thing, and I think it was based here, maybe it was Ellington, I can't remember. One of those bands was playing, and they didn't broadcast it because it was a black band. It's the radio, people. Ain't no one gonna know they black by listening on the radio. They weren't gonna be able to Google on the internet who's this Duke Ellington guy. He sounds kind of like a Negro. It's just so shocking to me when I listen and when I dig and when I think about all of it. And thank you, Europe. Thank you to all you Europeans who love jazz and have embraced and supported the music. And especially during the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, the refuge that so many of you brought and allowed these musicians to have. And here's something that's interesting to think about. During the 30s and 40s, as Europe was dealing with depression issues and then the Great War, the greatest war of all time, that war that America didn't enter until 41, for blacks, a lot of them felt safer in Europe. There's a world war waging there. Raging. Cities are being bombed off the map. But these brothers are like, that feels safer than the south side of DC. You know what I mean? I might have to run out of the village one time, but I ain't gonna get lynched for nothing. Europe was in turmoil. And yet so many black musicians said, you know what? I feel safer here in a war zone than I do back home in America. And that's one of the things that people kind of in Europe don't recognize either, is just how heavily armed America is. Oh, white folks be having guns. White folks are armed to the teeth. And again, I want to make this political, but jazz is such a powerful medicine for what ails us. And it makes my hair stand on end on my arms. It makes my tear ducts tickle. It makes my mind just reel. And it makes my heart long for the ability to love like that. To love unconditionally. To love in spite of wrong being done to me. It takes a big person. It takes a big person to try to be that bridge. And Armstrong, again, was a big part of it as well. And he often says how whites were so important to him, and they are what made him. You know, they made his career and his wealth and his comfortable living. And so a cheers and a shout goes out to Armstrong, the Duke, Count, Ella, Billie, all those greats, Sidney Bechet. Just, we got to send that love back that way. So cheers to you, Black America, for what you've accomplished and what you've given the world. Cheers to you, Europe, for being that safe haven in the storm, in spite of the storm raging in Europe. Like, that was the irony when I was saying that a minute ago. I'm like, they found safety in Europe. I'm like, and Europe was in chaos. It's insane. It's insane. Y'all be safe. Y'all be blessed. I'm still waiting for the Savoy record to show up so I can do this thing I want to do. I got a lot of fun stuff coming. Talk to you soon. I'm the Jazz Shepherd. Buy some Jazz Shepherd merchandise. Help out my family. Times are a little tough. We're getting through. Hopefully unemployment gets renewed here for me. I'm still waiting to find out. But Talk to you soon. It's all love. Peace.